Lonely Rancher was just buying a cow until the child whispered, "It's my mommy's last day alive." Wyoming, spring of 1890. The town of Frontier Ridge boiled beneath the surface. Its soil cracked from drought, its cattle herds thinned by thieves who struck under moonless skies. The people had grown brittle like dry timber before a spark. They needed justice, or at least someone to burn. Jed Walker rode in with nothing but dust in his coat seams and a listless eye for livestock. A rancher with no ranch left to love. He had buried a wife and daughter in the same frost-bitten week 3 winters ago. Since then, he had spoken mostly to his boots and trusted no man beyond a fence post. As he dismounted at the edge of the open-air market, a hand gripped his forearm. A stranger, gray-toothed and thin-lipped, who leaned in like he was passing on a curse. "They'll hang her at high noon, mister," the man rasped. "You just buying a cow or buying trouble, too?" Jed didn't answer. His eyes followed the crowd's attention toward the courthouse steps, now repurposed as a makeshift gallows. A woman stood atop the platform, wrists chained, neck collared with iron like some rusted animal. Her dress was torn, her skin bruised in the shape of angry fingers. She stared downward, jaw set, saying nothing. "They say she slit the ranch foreman's throat and ran off with 2 of his cattle," the man added. "But folk figure she did more than that. She's an outsider and the only one left after the last stampede. Ain't no kin claiming her." Jed turned, meaning to walk away. His boots crunched gravel. Then came a tug, a child's hand clutching his duster. He looked down. A girl no older than 5 stared up at him with eyes too big for her face. She wore no shoes, just muddy socks and a dress that swallowed her small frame. Her hands trembled as she clutched a wooden water gourd. Her cheeks were smudged with soot. "It's my mommy's last day alive," she whispered. "Please help." Jed froze. For a moment, all he could see were those eyes, so achingly familiar, so filled with the kind of desperate hope only a child dares hold on to. The same eyes his daughter had before the fever took her. He looked back up. The woman on the gallows lifted her gaze just once, and Jed's heart buckled. He turned on his heel, stormed toward his horse. From the saddlebag, he withdrew a folded leather wallet worn soft with years and sweat. Inside it was a metal badge dulled with age, a silver star encircled in rust. "Deputy Writer," it read, an honorary title once granted during border conflicts years ago, enough to stall executions if probable cause was claimed. Sevens. Jed marched to the desktop and picked up the deputy sheriff, the deputy marshal, and slapped the badge onto the table with a folded parchment. "Jed Walker," he said, "I'm invoking Section 7. This woman is now a protected witness in an ongoing investigation. The scaffold comes down." The deputy sheriff blinked. The sheriff was absent out on a land dispute in Powder Creek. There was no one to overrule the badge in Jed's hand. "The judge hasn't ruled yet," Jed cut in, "which means she's still under review. You hang her today, and you hang the law right with her." He emphasized the last right with her, which referred to the fact that Smith and Moss didn't hang her. They court-martialed her out of the court. The execution rope was untied. The execution rope was untied. Maria stumbled off the platform, barely catching herself. Lily ran to her mother, arms wrapping around legs too frail to hold the girl's weight. Jed turned without waiting for thanks. His voice was dry as timber. "You've got 24 hours, Miss Hayes. Stay alive long enough to prove you're worth it." Sevens. He mounted his horse, the crowd parting like prairie grass before a storm. No one spoke. "Not yet." Maria looked at the man on the horse, eyes dazed, but blinking towards something real. Lily clutched her mother's hand and whispered, "He looks like he forgot how to smile. Mama, maybe we can help him remember." And with that, the gallows stood empty, and the town of Frontier Ridge held its breath. The road from town to Jed Walker's ranch was rough, winding through dry brush and brittle snow. He rode ahead in silence, the reins loose in his gloved hands. Behind him, Maria and Lily clung to the back of the wagon he had borrowed from the blacksmith, their breaths turning white in the cold morning air. Jed had not spoken more than a dozen words since they left Frontier Ridge, but his eyes flicked to the rear view every few minutes, watching, measuring. Maria sat hunched, arms wrapped around Lily, her fingers stiff with cold and fear. Her voice came low, barely audible over the creak of the wagon wheels. H said I'd never leave that scaffold alive. Jed did not turn, but something in his jaw tightened. Maria's words came in fragments, broken like driftwood after a flood. It happened fast. I was bringing Lily home. That man, he smelled like rot gut, grabbed me by the hair. I pushed back, screamed, then black. Just black. When I woke, he was dead. She swallowed hard. The sheriff was gone. The mayor said it was clear cut. Said I was just some nobody trying to flee with cattle I never touched. And then the tea. Jed's brow furrowed. The tea? He asked, still not looking back. She nodded, eyes distant. Each morning from Mr. Harper's house. Said it was a kindness. But my hands started shaking. I forgot names then, days. And now I forget my own strength. Jed said nothing, but the image of the bruises around her wrists settled heavy in his chest. Maria looked at Lily, who lay curled against her side, trying to sleep. She doesn't know everything. She just knows I tried to keep her safe. As they neared the ridge leading into his property, townsfolk began to gather behind them like flies to the scent of blood. Word had traveled fast. A man who once helped guard borders now stood accused of sheltering a murderess. Someone shouted from behind a grove of pine. Walker's gone soft. He's harboring a killer. Another voice jeered. That woman's got death in her eyes. Jed reined in the horse. The wagon creaked to a halt. He climbed down, coat flapping in the wind. He walked slowly to the back where Lily sat shivering. He took off his coat lined with wool worn at the elbows and knelt. Gently he wrapped it around Lily's shoulders, buttoning it beneath her chin. Her lips quivered, but she did not cry. Then Jed turned. He faced the crowd. 20 men and women, arms crossed, hands near pistols, fury boiling beneath layers of grief and blame. Some he recognized from the church, others from the war. Jed's voice rang out, even and low. Ride tonight if you must, but know this. His eyes swept across the crowd. I've buried one child already. I'll bury myself before I let another one hang. Silence. Maria's breath hitched. Jed helped her down from the wagon, holding her steady as they approached the cabin. It was small, patched with tin and salvage wood, but dry and warm. He opened the door. Inside, the fire was still alive in the hearth. A faded quilt lay across a chair. Dust mote swirled in the amber light. Maria paused at the threshold. Jed looked at her. It's not a jail, he said flatly. But don't take me for a fool. She nodded. I won't. He helped Lily to the cot in the corner, tucking the child in with a gentleness that betrayed the storm behind his eyes. When he turned back, Maria had not moved. He glanced at the sky. Noon was only hours away. There's something wrong here, he said, more to himself than to her. And if they want to string you up without asking the right questions, then maybe it's time somebody did. Maria sank onto a wooden stool, her hands shaking, her voice cracked, things like which builders came to dream. Were you helping us? Jed looked at Lily, who now slept wrapped in his coat, her tiny hand curled like a petal beneath her chin. He shrugged, voice gruff. Because someone once helped me before I forgot how to believe in people. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying whispers and warnings. Inside, the silence between them was not comfort, but it was not cruelty either. For now, that was enough. The wind bit sharper that evening as Jed Walker rode alone, retracing the path Maria had described where the dead man was found, sprawled near the edge of Willow Creek. The trail had grown cold, not just with snow, but with intention. Whoever cleaned this place had done so with care. Too much care. There was no blood stain, no scuffle marks, no sign a body had ever hit the earth. It was spotless. Too spotless. Jed crouched near a patch of churned mud where Maria said she had fallen. His fingers sifted through the damp soil, turning over pebbles, brush, and the memory of things lost. His thoughts echoed with Maria's broken whisper from earlier that day. I woke up and he was gone. Just gone. The sheriff's quick judgment, the mayor's silence, the tea that made her sick. It all stank like rotting feed. Suddenly, a voice from memory. Lily. The bad man had a snake on his belt. Jed's eyes snapped open. Snake. He scanned the underbrush in treine. Then he saw it. Something tucked beneath a gnarled root barely covered with moss. A flash of dull brass. He knelt and pulled it free. A belt, worn, cracked, but unmistakable. A coiled rattlesnake was stamped into the buckle. He recognized it. Only one man in town owned snakehide like this. Mayor Charles Harper, the man who had called Maria a shame to this town. The same man who had delivered her daily tea, swearing it was a kindness from those who still had decency. Jed stood slowly, belt in hand, heart drumming hard. Back at the ranch, the fire flickered low. Maria was coughing again, deeper now, rasping like wind through dead trees. Her skin pale, her lips tinged blue. Jed entered quietly, hung his coat, and walked to where she lay curled on the cot. He noticed a faint bruise on her forearm just above the vein, and another tiny puncture wounds. He sat down. Her eyes fluttered open. You came back, she whispered. I did. He reached forward, brushing aside her sleeve. Been giving you that tea long? She hesitated. Weeks, maybe more. Jed stared at the marks, then gently lifted her wrist. His hand swallowed her. We need to see Doc Ellis, he said. Now, before she could protest, he wrapped her in a shawl and hoisted her into the wagon. Lily clambered in beside them, still half asleep, clutching the corner of Jed's coat like it was a lifeline. The ride through the dark was quick, silent, but for the jangle of tack and the heavy breath of the horses. Doc Ellis's cabin stood dimly lit on the edge of a frozen pasture. The old man blinked in surprise as Jed carried Maria inside. Poison, Jed said simply. Slow kind. Doc's hands moved fast, efficient. He checked her pulse, her eyes, her breath. Then he sniffed the faint residue from her teacup. Jed had brought it just in case. Yarrow. Black nightshade. Not enough to kill quick, but over time it'll shut her down from the inside. Maria blinked, dazed. I thought it was just nerves. Doc shook his head grimly. It was murder wearing patience. Jed stood silent, fists clenched. When Doc stepped away to fetch a tonic, Jed sat beside her, eyes fixed on hers. He reached for her hand again, this time, not to inspect, but to hold. Warm, steady, intentional. This ain't justice, he said, voice low. It's a cover-up. Maria looked away, ashamed. But Jed held firm. I don't know who they think they're dealing with, he muttered. But they're about to learn. I bury ghosts, not truth. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the fire burned a little hotter. The wind rose with a low, mournful cry as Jed Walker hitched the last of the supplies to the wagon. Clouds of breath swirled from the mouths of the horses like ghosts fleeing the earth. Snow had begun falling again, thin flakes at first, then thicker, heavier, a slow white curtain between the world and time. He glanced back toward the cabin. Maria was wrapped in wool, pale and quiet. Her breast came shallow but steady. Beside her, Lily was tying a frayed ribbon into her doll's hair, the same one she had carried since the market square. Her fingers trembled. She looked up. "Will Mama still be here tomorrow?" she asked. Jed froze. The question hit like buckshot. He knelt beside her and smoothed the hair from her forehead. "Not if we sit still," he said. "But if we move fast and smart, she'll be here. I promise." He lifted Maria gently, her frame too light, too brittle, like she had already left part of herself behind. Lily climbed into the wagon. Jed cracked the reins. They headed north. The trail narrowed quickly, snaking up the first ridge toward Red Elk Hollow. Jed knew this land years ago when he wore a badge and a younger man's hope. He had helped a traveling preacher settle there. Reverend Isaac lived alone now, in exile by choice in a chapel carved half into the mountainside. It had once been sanctuary for the lost. It needed to be again, but they were not alone. As the wagon turned the bend near Gray Rock Bluff, the first shot rang out. Jed ducked instinctively. The horses screamed and reared. A second shot split the air. Then the sound of leather snapping and the thunder of hooves vanishing downhill. Jed cursed. The wagon tilted hard. Maria rolled, gasping. Lily screamed. Jed leapt out, gun aw, scanning the ridge. Two men emerged from the trees. Dark coats, rifles up. Jed recognized them. Harper's men. The mayor had grown tired of waiting. "You're trespassing," one of them barked. "Hand the woman over." Jed stepped in front of the wagon. "She's under my protection," he said. "Not anymore." Another shot cracked. Jed's horse dropped. Jed fired once, grazing a tree near their feet. "Next one lands in your chest." The men hesitated, then fell back into the woods, regrouping. No time. Jed moved fast, dragging Maria onto his back. "Lily, hold on to my belt," he said. "Do not let go, no matter what." Snow churned beneath their boots as they pushed through the thicket, leaving the broken wagon behind. Hour after hour, Jed pressed forward, his legs burning, breath hitching in clouds. The slope steepened. Trees leaned like old men whispering warnings. Ice cracked underfoot, wind tore at his coat. Still, he climbed. Maria's weight shifted. She coughed. "Jen," she rasped. "Don't talk," he said. "Just breathe." Lily stumbled, fell. He pulled her up, held her hand in his gloved fist. They came to a narrow crossing above the frozen stream. Jed paused, chest heaving. Maria moaned. Jed looked at the child, her cheeks red and raw with cold. "I lost my little girl to fever," he said softly. "To no one, to everyone. I ain't losing another to fire and rope." He took a breath and stepped forward. They crossed the ravine. Night fell. Still they walked. Finally, near the treeline, a light flickered through the snow, dim but steady, like the eye of a promise. The chapel. Jed pushed through the last drift and pounded on the door. It creaked open. Reverend Isaac stood there, old and wiry, eyes sharp despite the years. "Jed Walker," he said. "What devil are you running from?" Jed stepped into the light, Maria in his arms, Lily at his side. "Not the devil," he said. "Just men pretending to be God." The storm quieted as night deepened, leaving only a soft whimpering wind and the sharp creak of old trees swaying in the cold. Snowflakes settled like ash on the silent ridge, and even the wolves had gone quiet. Jed found shelter in a forgotten trapper's cabin. Its door half-hinged, its floor dusted with years of pine needles and abandonment. The walls leaned and the roof groaned, but it stood. And for now, that was enough. Inside, the air was bitter and dry. Jed laid Maria down carefully on a makeshift cot of pelts and feed sacks, tucking her in with his own coat. She was shivering, even in sleep, her cheeks pale and sunken. Lily curled beside her, arms wrapped around a threadbare doll whose seams had long since faded. She didn't speak. She just pressed her face into Maria's side as if afraid the warmth might vanish if she let go. Jed moved quickly. He stepped back into the dark and cold breath, huffing in clouds. He found a broken tree limb near the treine and began dragging it through the snow in a wide arc, masking the trail of their footprints. He moved methodically, mind sharp despite the exhaustion that curled in his bones. Then he pulled strips of cloth from his saddlebag, a torn bandage, a length of rope, and scattered them toward the west ridge in the opposite direction. One of his gloves worn and cracked at the knuckles. He tossed near a frozen stream bed, a false trail, a lie in the snow. When he returned to the cabin, he paused by the doorway and used the heel of his boot to stamp a different trail behind them, leading nowhere but into deeper woods. Then he stepped inside and let the door shut quietly behind him. The room was dim. Firelight danced low across the walls, casting thin shadows that bent and breathed like ghosts. Maria was awake. Her eyes caught the flicker of flame, glassy but aware. Her breath rasped softly. Her voice, when it came, was a brittle whisper. "Will you help me?" she asked. "I'm just another ghost walking." Jed crouched beside the fire, feeding in a scrap of kindling. Sparks rose and popped in the stillness. He didn't answer at first. The silence stretched, quiet as snowfall, heavy as memory. Then, without turning, he said, "Your girl's eyes won't let me forget mine." Maria closed her eyes. Her lips trembled. Slowly, she reached out and rested her fingers on his hand. It was barely a touch, weightless, like a feather drifting down, but it stayed there, long enough to matter, long enough to be real. Then she pulled it back, burying her hand beneath the coat again. Outside, the wind changed. Jed stood, senses tightening. He felt it before he heard it. Hooves crunching over crusted snow. Slow, deliberate. He moved to the door, not rushing, just steady. The latch lifted with a soft click. A man stepped in, broad-shouldered, face worn under a brown hat dusted in frost. His rifle slung over one shoulder, hand resting near the grip. His boots left dark prints across the floorboards as he paused in the doorway, eyes scanning the scene, the low fire, the sleeping child, the pale woman, the man standing in front of them like a wall of old timber. Jed met his eyes, steady and unmoving. Then, without a word, Jed reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out something small and dull, a tarnished silver star badge, the kind given to deputy riders long ago. It was scratched, dented, a relic of forgotten duties, but it still carried weight. Jed tossed it onto the ground between them. "Give that to the mayor," he said, voice low but sharp. "Tell him I'm not done fighting." The man looked down. The badge glinted once in the firelight. A faint echo of honor long buried. He looked back at Jed, then at Maria and Lily. He didn't draw, didn't speak, just nodded, sharp, hesitant, and backed out the door. It shut behind him with a heavy click. Jed stood there for a long moment, listening to the retreating hoof batats fade into the night. Then he exhaled slow and deep, as if letting go of a breath he'd been holding for years. Behind him from the cot, Maria's voice came again, thin, almost lost. "Did you ever stop being that man?" she asked. Jed didn't answer immediately. He stared into the flames. "I tried," he said finally. "But grief don't let you. It just hides in your bones and waits." He turned to look at her. Her eyes glistened in the firelight. "Tomorrow," he said. "We don't run. Tomorrow we return. Sevens." And Maria, half lying to sleep, murmured one word, her lips barely moving. "Together." The mountain air was calmer by morning, as if nature itself had taken a breath after a long night of tension. Inside the humble chapel cabin nestled in the ridge, the fire crackled low, casting warm shadows across the wooden walls. Maria stirred. She blinked up at the ceiling, chest rising in shallow rhythm before turning to the gentle weight against her side. Lily slept peacefully, one hand clutched in her mother's. Maria smiled faintly and pulled her daughter closer. Jed stood quietly near the doorway, arms folded, watching the sunrise touch the mountain edge. Then he turned and placed a folded piece of parchment on the table beside Maria. She looked at it. Her eyes widened. The letter was in a woman's hand, shaky but fierce. It told of the nights the old housemaid watched her employer, the richest man in Frontier Ridge, steep strange herbs into Maria's tea. How the man had returned bloodied after the night someone was killed. How he told her not to speak, that the girl was good for no more than a quiet grave. I found it in her Bible, Jed said. She's been gone 2 winters now, but her truth stayed. Maria clutched the letter to her chest. Jed continued, placing other items on the table, each like a nail in the coffin of a lie. The snakeskin belt Lily had remembered. The physician's signed report confirming signs of long-term herbal poisoning. The written testimony of the old mountain preacher, swearing that Maria had come to him afraid, long before the murder, begging for help and sanctuary. Jed looked at the two of them, mother and child, and spoke gently. I'm going back. Sevens. Maria's breath caught. They'll hang you, she said. Then let them try, Jed answered. But not before I tell them who they're really burying. By high noon, the town square of Frontier Ridge was filled once more. But this time, it was not rage that stirred the crowd. It was uncertainty, murmurs, the sting of doubt. The gallows stood ready, but the noose swung empty. Then Jed rode in, his horse weary, his coat dusted in mountain frost. He dismounted slowly, removed his hat, and walked toward the courthouse steps. Behind him, 2 others followed, the preacher from the ridge and the town doctor, both holding sealed envelopes. Jed walked straight into the meeting hall where the council of townsmen sat on their table. The rope that had been meant for Maria now lay coiled, waiting. Jed laid out the evidence piece by piece. He spoke clearly without anger, without fear. This is the truth. A woman silenced by poison. A girl nearly left an orphan. And a man he held up the belt. So sure of his power, he forgot. Truth can bleed through snow. He turned toward the crowd behind him. She didn't kill. She was made weak, scared, broken, but she never stopped protecting her child. You called that murder. He pointed toward the scaffold outside the window. If that scaffold rises, it won't stand for justice. It'll stand for shame. A heavy silence followed. Then the preacher stepped forward and said softly, I saw her faith. Even when she thought no one would hear her prayers, God did. The mayor looked at the doctor, who nodded grimly. The council conferred in hushed tones. A gavel struck wood. The verdict came down like rain on parched soil. Maria Hayes is hereby exonerated of all charges. The gallows will be dismantled by dusk. A breath passed through the crowd like a wind lifting dust from a forgotten truth. Jed stepped outside into the sunlight. He looked up at the scaffold, and for the first time in years, he smiled. The gallows came down by dusk. 2 days later, the wealthiest man in Frontier Ridge was shackled and led out of his manor under the weary eyes of the townsfolk. Not everyone cheered, but no one stopped it either. Maria was free. The storm had passed, but not without leaving behind new roots in its wake. The first to arrive at Jed's modest ranch were not men with guns, but women with baskets, jars of blackberry jam, fresh milk, bread wrapped in linen. Someone stacked a cord of firewood by the porch. A note was tied to it, unsigned. Every child deserves a warm night. Maria stood on the porch, holding Lily close, watching the small signs of a town, trying to make peace. Inside, the cabin breathed again. Maria set up a small stove near the back. Each morning, she baked simple meals and left them in baskets by the church steps. No names, no praise expected, just food for anyone hungry enough to take it. Lily, now attending the local schoolhouse, returned each afternoon with chalk on her hands and wildflowers in her pockets. She would sit by the fire, recounting every letter she learned, every friend she made. Jed mostly listened. His repairs to the ranch were quiet and steady, mending shutters, replacing roof tiles, resanding the porch railing by hand, but the most delicate act he did was done when no one was looking. One morning, Lily found her broken braid cut the day she tried to protect her mother, woven carefully and fastened to the back of the rocking chair Maria always sat in. She didn't say anything. She just touched it and smiled. That night, Maria noticed the small wooden shelf above the fireplace. Two framed photographs stood side by side. One was an old image, faded edges, a young woman and child lost long ago. The other was newer, herself and Lily, taken just after the trial by a traveling photographer who had offered it as a gift. Maria reached up, her fingers brushing the edge of both frames. Jed sat nearby sharpening a tool, not looking up. She asked softly, "Why stay, Jed?" He paused, laid the tool down, then turned to her, his voice low. "Sure, because I remembered what home feels like. And it wasn't four walls or cattle or silence." He looked at her, then at Lily asleep in the corner. "It was the sound of her laugh, the smell of your bread. It's her chalk drawings on my floor, and your hands fixing what I thought was broken for good." Maria's throat tightened. She whispered, "You brought us back." Jed shook his head gently. "No, you walked back on your own. I just opened the door." In that room of mended wood and quiet firelight, nothing else needed saying. The past was not forgotten, but it no longer weighed heavier than the present. And for the first time in years, the house on the hill felt like it was breathing again. 1 year passed, and with it the last remnants of winter's sorrow thawed into the bloom of spring. Frontier Ridge stood quieter these days. Less gun smoke, more laughter. And on a Sunday morning, beneath the worn beams of the old chapel, every bench was filled. Lily stood at the front holding a paper with both hands. Her hair tied back in a braid, a new one mended with love. Her voice wavered, but she read clear and proud. "I love my mom and pa, too." The room went still. Some smiled, some blinked away tears. Jed sat in the second pew, Maria's hand in his. When Lily finished, he rose, walked up to her, and gently lifted her from the wooden stool. He did not say anything, just held her close, then placed his other hand on Maria's shoulder. Maria's eyes shimmered with quiet gratitude. Lily leaned against them both, her world safely framed in arms that had once nearly lost everything. After the service, they walked out as a family. Not everyone clapped, but no one looked away. They climbed the old hill behind the church, the place Jed had once stood alone in a storm, whispering a promise to ghosts. The land was green now, the soil soft from melted snow. Lily skipped ahead, her arms out like wings. At the top, Jed reached into his coat and pulled out a small rough cloth sack. Maria raised an eyebrow, curious. He untied it slowly and revealed a simple strip of leather, softened with time worn smooth. No gold, no jewels, just the texture of miles and scars. He looked into her eyes. No ring, just a bond. He wrapped the leather around both their hands. "And this time, I will not break it. Not for fear or grief or the ghosts of what we lost." Maria inhaled sharply, blinking fast. "I never needed a ring," she whispered. "Just somewhere to belong." Jed's voice softened. "Then let this be that place." Billy ran back and saw the tied hands. Her smile lit up like dawn. She flung her arms around them both, breathless from the run. "We found the home you lost. P." Jed's knees nearly buckled. It was the name P said without hesitation, without fear. Not earned through blood, but through every step they had walked since that cold market morning. He dropped to one knee and pulled her in close, tight, grateful. Behind them, The town stirred, not as judge or jury this time, but as witness. They no longer whispered about Jed Walker as the man who had buried love and walked with ghosts. Now they spoke of him as the one who dragged three souls from the gallows, one by law, one by will, and one by heart. At the edge of town stood the little ranch house, no longer gray with silence. Inside there were drawings on the walls, crayon-colored skies, and stick figures with matching hats. There was a photo by the mantel. Jed, Maria, and Lily standing under the chapel's arch, and next to it, tucked inside a leather-bound book, was Lily's drawing. Three figures holding hands, the hill behind them drawn with a sunrise. On the bottom in shaky, careful letters, "We are the family that lived. We are the home that stayed." And for the first time in a long, long while, came to Frontier Ridge with warmth, not warning. If this story moved you, if the quiet courage of a man who had nothing left, the strength of a woman wrongly condemned, and the innocence of a child clinging to hope touched your heart, then you belong here with us. This is Wild West Love Stories, where love doesn't just survive the dust in the distance, it rises from the rope, the ashes, and the silence. Subscribe now for more true-hearted tales from the American frontier, where every story reminds us, even in the wildest lands, love still finds a way.